It all started on a quiet, ordinary evening, the kind of evening where nothing seems out of place, until it suddenly is. The kind that makes you wonder if the people closest to you are really who you think they are. In a small, sunlit house at the edge of town, two sisters sat across from each other at the kitchen table. On the surface they looked like any siblings might, laughing at a shared memory, bickering over who drank the last cup of tea. But behind the smiles and the casual teasing, something unspoken lingered in the air, a tension that felt almost electric. Something had shifted between them and neither wanted to say it out loud. Clara, the older sister by 3 years, had always been the steady one. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that made people trust her without even realizing why. She had a calm smile and a mind that seemed to solve problems before anyone else even noticed them. But tonight, that calm felt fragile, as if a storm were building just beneath the surface. Across from her, Sophie, the younger sister, fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve, eyes darting around the kitchen, sharp and restless. Sophie had always been fiery, full of curiosity and sometimes recklessness. People often called her impulsive, but Clara knew there was more to her than that. More that she didn't fully understand. The tension wasn't new. It had been there for years, simmering quietly, growing in small, unnoticed ways. A harsh word remembered too long, a secret shared too late, a competition that neither could truly admit. Growing up, they had loved each other fiercely, but that love had always carried an undercurrent of rivalry. Sometimes it was subtle, a glance, a comment, a quiet challenge. Sometimes it was sharper, leaving invisible marks that didn't heal. But tonight it felt different. Heavier. As if some invisible line had been crossed and no one knew exactly what had triggered it. The house itself seemed to reflect the tension. Shadows from the fading sun stretched across the walls, creating strange shapes, almost like silent witnesses to whatever was unfolding. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, even the faint rustle of leaves outside seemed louder, almost accusatory. Clara leaned back in her chair, trying to steady her racing thoughts, while Sophie's leg bounced under the table in nervous energy. Neither spoke, but every small movement seemed loaded with meaning. Every glance, every shift, was a conversation without words. "You know," Clara finally said, her voice soft but steady, "things don't have to be like this." Her words were simple, but there was a weight behind them. She didn't just mean tonight, she meant everything. The tension, the rivalry, the silent battles that had stretched over years. Sophie's eyes narrowed slightly, a shadow passing over her usually bright face. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to say that it wasn't her fault, but the words stuck somewhere between her throat and her heart. "You always say that," Sophie finally whispered, voice low. "But maybe it does have to be like this." There was a strange certainty in her tone, as if she had made a decision that Clara hadn't yet guessed. And for a moment, Clara felt a flicker of fear, the kind that comes when you realize someone you thought you knew completely is suddenly a mystery. The air between them grew heavier, almost tangible, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Outside, the sky darkened quickly, clouds rolling in like a warning. Clara studied Sophie, trying to read the expression on her face. There was something there, anger maybe, but also hurt. Or was it something darker? Clara couldn't tell, and that uncertainty gnawed at her more than anything else. They had shared everything once, the secrets, the dreams, the plans for the future, but now the lines were blurred. Trust had become fragile, and loyalty had taken on a complicated edge. What had started as normal sisterly tension was now on the brink of something neither of them could easily define. And the worst part? They both knew that what happened next could change everything. A sudden sound from the living room made them both freeze. Neither of them moved, but their hearts leapt. It was just the wind, or maybe it wasn't. Clara's mind raced through every possible scenario, every memory of past disagreements that had spiraled out of control. Sophie's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. And in that frozen moment, they both realized something terrifying. Whatever was about to happen, neither sister could fully predict or control it. Time seemed to stretch, the silence growing louder, pressing down on them like a physical weight. The familiar walls of the home suddenly felt unfamiliar, almost claustrophobic. Both sisters were aware, deep down, that whatever came next would test the limits of their bond, and perhaps even force them to confront truths they had spent years avoiding. And then, just as Clara opened her mouth to speak again, a knock echoed through the front door, sharp, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Both sisters jumped, hearts racing. Who could it be at this hour? And why did it feel like the arrival of this visitor was connected to the tension that had been simmering all evening? Neither sister knew the answer, and in that uncertainty, the rivalry and the tension between them felt more alive than ever. As the knock came again, louder this time, both Clara and Sophie exchanged a glance, a mix of fear, suspicion, and something unspoken that had always lingered between them. Whatever was waiting outside could change everything, and neither of them could guess what was about to unfold. The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. Between two sisters who shared a past, a home, and a complicated bond, how far could loyalty stretch before it finally snapped? Clara hesitated for a moment, staring at the front door as the second knock came, louder and more insistent. She could feel Sophie's gaze on her, sharp and questioning, as if daring her to make the first move. Neither of them spoke. The quiet between them had become almost unbearable, filled with memories they couldn't put into words. Clara finally stood, each step toward the door deliberate, every creak of the wooden floor echoing through the house. Sophie followed slowly, as if drawn by curiosity and fear at the same time. The door swung open, revealing the darkened street outside. No one was there at first, just the wind stirring leaves across the porch. But then a folded envelope slid across the doorstep, and both sisters instinctively stepped back. Clara bent down and picked it up, her fingers brushing against the cool paper. There was no stamp, no return address. Only her name, written in a familiar hand she hadn't seen in years. She froze. Sophie's voice broke the silence, low and sharp. "That's from her, isn't it?" She didn't need to say more. Both of them knew exactly who her meant. Their older cousin Mara had disappeared from their lives nearly a decade ago, leaving only whispers and fragments of stories behind. Some said she left voluntarily, tired of the tension that had always haunted the family. Others whispered darker possibilities, hinting at betrayals, secrets, and grudges that might never have been fully forgiven. Clara's hand tightened around the envelope. Sophie stepped closer, trying to peer at the handwriting without touching it. "Do you think she knows about everything?" The words hung in the air. They weren't just talking about the letter. They were talking about all the hidden truths, the silent rivalries, and the things neither sister had dared to admit out loud. Clara didn't answer immediately. The truth was she wasn't sure. Mara had always been clever, always a step ahead, and the possibility that she had returned into their lives with a purpose made the air feel charged, almost dangerous. As they stood in the doorway, the memory of their childhood came rushing back. The three of them had once been inseparable, laughing late into the night, sharing secrets and daring each other into small mischiefs that felt thrilling at the time. But as the years passed, cracks began to form. Small arguments over silly things turned into days-long silences. Comparisons and competitions, who got better grades, who made more friends, who could push the limits further, festered into a quiet resentment. Mara had always been the spark, the one who could turn a small joke into a fiery argument, and eventually the tension had become unbearable. Sophie broke the spell of memory with a small, sharp laugh, almost nervous. "Remember the night she dared us to sneak into the old greenhouse?" Clara smiled faintly, though her mind was elsewhere. The greenhouse had been forbidden territory, and the memory of sneaking past the rusted gate, hearts pounding, felt distant yet vivid. But it also reminded her of how quickly Mara could stir trouble, and how easily mischief could turn into something serious. That night had ended with shattered glass, angry voices, and a secret that the sisters had sworn never to speak of again. Yet somehow, the memory felt relevant now, as if Mara's disappearance and sudden return were tied to the same kind of reckoning. Clara opened the envelope carefully, the paper cracking slightly under her fingers. Inside was a single sheet, folded neatly. The handwriting was unmistakable, flowing, elegant, and almost taunting. It was brief, but every word felt deliberate, a puzzle designed to unsettle. "Some truths cannot stay buried," it read. There was no signature, no explanation. Just that line, and a small symbol at the bottom that both sisters recognized immediately, a mark Mara had always used in her private notes, a tiny triangle intertwined with a circle. Sophie's breath caught. "She's back, and she's here for a reason." Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried more weight than any shout could. Clara nodded slowly, a chill running down her spine. Mara's return could mean danger, confrontation, or perhaps even the exposure of long-hidden secrets. The sisters exchanged a glance, both aware that their childhood rivalry now had a shadow stretching over the present. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in with memories and tension. Clara set the envelope on the table, but neither sister moved to open it further. They both knew that what came next would test them, not just individually but together. The bond between them had survived years of competition and small betrayals, but this felt different. This felt like a reckoning. Sophie finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "Do you think she remembers everything?" About us, about the fights, the secrets, the lies we told ourselves to survive. Clara looked at her younger sister, seeing the same mix of fear and curiosity mirrored in her own eyes. They had both hidden things from each other, things that could hurt if revealed. And now, with Mara back, it felt like the past was reaching across time to remind them that nothing stays hidden forever. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, carrying a faint echo of something, perhaps a warning. Clara stood and walked to the window, peering out into the darkened street, trying to catch any sign of movement, any clue of what might come next. Sophie followed, standing close behind, her hand brushing against Clara's without either acknowledging it. There was an unspoken understanding between them now. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, or at least they would have to. The envelope sat on the table like a silent threat, its contents a mystery, its message clear. Mara was back and her return would not be simple. Questions loomed larger than answers. What had she been doing all these years? Why had she chosen now to return? And most importantly, what would she want from the two sisters who had once been her closest allies and fiercest competitors? The night stretched on, shadows growing longer, and the sisters remained by the window, caught between fear and anticipation. Neither spoke again, yet both felt the same uneasy certainty. Life between them would never be the same. The rivalry, the tension, the secrets, they were no longer just memories. They were alive, waiting for the next move, waiting for the next confrontation. And somewhere in the darkness, Mara was waiting too. The next morning arrived quietly, but the house felt heavier than usual, as if it had absorbed the tension from the night before. Clara and Sophie moved through the kitchen almost silently, the envelope still sitting on the table like a weight neither wanted to touch. Breakfast felt like a ritual they had gone through 100 times, but now every bite, every clink of cutlery, seemed loaded with unspoken meaning. Sophie kept glancing at the door as if expecting Mara to appear at any moment, while Clara's mind was spinning, trying to piece together what her cousin's sudden return could signify. The sisters had always been attuned to each other, but now that closeness felt fragile. Clara remembered how Mara had always liked to pit them against each other, sometimes subtly, sometimes with deliberate cruelty. Back then, it had been a game, but the consequences had always been real. Sophie noticed Clara's distant gaze and spoke, soft but insistent. "Do you think she's testing us? Like old times?" Clara didn't answer immediately, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know. Mara had a way of turning even the simplest interaction into a challenge or a trap. As the morning unfolded, strange little things began to appear. A misplaced notebook on the sofa, a shadow moving just at the edge of a room, the faint scent of perfume neither sister recognized. Clara's mind raced. Had Mara come alone or was someone helping her? And why leave a letter instead of knocking again or coming inside? Sophie, usually impulsive, suggested checking the old shed behind the house, the place where Mara had spent countless afternoons writing in her journals and hiding small treasures. Clara hesitated. The shed was a symbol of childhood secrets, some innocent, some dangerous, and the thought of returning there now made her stomach tighten. As they approached, memories resurfaced. The afternoon they had found a broken music box, the nights of whispered plans under its creaking roof, the fights over who had broken the old bicycle. The shed had been a battlefield of small rivalries, but it had also been a sanctuary, a place where the sisters had once felt invincible together. Now, however, it seemed ominous, a place holding secrets they weren't sure they were ready to face. Sophie pushed the door open slowly, revealing dust-covered shelves and shadows stretching in every corner. The air smelled faintly of old wood and mildew, but there was something else too, something sharp, almost metallic. Clara leaned closer to see a small, folded piece of paper tucked under a loose floorboard. Sophie bent down and picked it up, eyes wide. The note contained a single word, "Remember." Nothing else. Clara felt her pulse quicken. Remember what? The games? The arguments? Or something worse, something buried deep in the past? Neither sister spoke, but both could feel the tension coil tighter, threading through every memory and every emotion. Back in the house, the phone rang sharp and sudden. Clara jumped, then grabbed it. The screen showed an unknown number. When she answered, there was only silence on the other end, and then a low, quiet voice whispered a single sentence. "Not everything is as it seems." The line went dead. Clara's hand shook as she hung up, and Sophie's expression mirrored her own unease. Whoever had called, they knew about the letter, about the envelope, and perhaps about more than just Mara's return. The day dragged on, but neither sister could focus on anything else. They tried to go about normal routines, but every sound, the mail sliding into the box, a car pulling up outside, even the wind rattling the windows, felt like a signal. Suspicion settled in not just toward Mara but toward each other. In the past, they had trusted each other instinctively, but now there was a flicker of doubt. Small disagreements, over what to eat, what to do next, quickly escalated into arguments, a reminder of the rivalry that had always lurked beneath the surface. By late afternoon, Clara suggested they visit the town's old library, a place where Mara had spent hours researching family history, collecting stories, and sometimes planting clues for her games. If Mara wanted them to uncover something, it might be there. Sophie agreed reluctantly, still scanning the windows as they prepared to leave. On the walk to the library, the tension between them was palpable. Words were few, but each glance carried history and hidden questions. Each step felt heavy with anticipation, as though the town itself was watching, waiting for the next move. At the library, dust and sunlight mixed in the high windows, creating a quiet, almost sacred space. Clara led the way to the section Mara had favored. Books on family genealogy, old letters, journals that chronicled secrets of generations past. As they sifted through the shelves, Sophie found a small leather-bound journal, one she didn't recognize. Inside, the first pages were filled with careful handwriting, but as they flipped through, they realized the entries hinted at more than just stories. There were cryptic notes, sketches, and references to events only someone close to the family could know. Clara felt her stomach tighten. Mara had been here, or had she left these clues years ago, waiting for the sisters to find them now? As the sun dipped lower, shadows stretched across the library floor, and the sisters realized they were not alone. Someone was watching, moving quietly between the stacks. Clara froze, sensing the presence before she could see it. Sophie's hand brushed against hers and instinctively they stayed close. The tension, the rivalry, and the secrets, all the threads of their complicated relationship, felt more alive than ever, tangled with the mystery that Mara's return had ignited. And yet, despite the fear, despite the suspicion, both sisters knew one thing: they couldn't turn back now. Whatever Mara wanted, whatever secrets had been set in motion, the answers would demand their attention. They were trapped in a game that had started years ago, one that threatened to unravel not just their past, but the fragile bond they still clung to. As the library doors closed behind them, a shadow moved outside, barely noticeable but unmistakable to the sisters. The feeling of being watched followed them home, stretching the night longer, the questions heavier. The main conflict, the unspoken rivalry, the mystery of Mara's return, and the secrets that had long been buried, was only just beginning to unfold. And somewhere in the darkness, the lines between trust and suspicion, love and rivalry, past and present, were about to blur even further. Night had fallen over the town, blanketing the streets in darkness, but the house at the edge of town seemed to hum with a quiet unease. Clara and Sophie sat in the living room, the envelope, the journal, and the note from the shed spread out before them like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit. Every sound outside, the distant bark of a dog, the crunch of leaves underfoot, even the whisper of the wind, made them flinch. It felt as though the night itself was watching, waiting for the next move in a game that neither sister fully understood. Sophie ran her fingers along the journal's spine, hesitant to open it further. "Do you think she set all of this up to test us? Or is it something more?" Clara didn't answer at first. She felt the same uncertainty, the same knot in her chest that had been growing since Mara's letter appeared. But unlike Sophie, Clara had always been the one to look ahead, to anticipate consequences. She studied the pages, her eyes scanning the cryptic notes, the sketches, the fragments of messages that seemed almost like riddles. Somewhere in the handwriting she recognized the familiar teasing, the quiet threat Mara had always carried, an intelligence that could charm and unsettle at the same time. Hours passed and the sisters spoke little, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Memories of childhood rivalry flickered through their minds, unbidden. The arguments over who deserved attention, the silent competitions that had left invisible scars, the nights spent plotting small acts of defiance. And beneath it all, the unspoken bond that had survived despite years of tension. Now that bond felt fragile, stretched tight by Mara's sudden reappearance. Suddenly, a sound made both sisters startle, a soft knock at the window. It was deliberate, measured, impossible to ignore. Clara rose slowly, every muscle tense, and moved to the window. Outside, a shadow shifted in the darkness, and for a moment she thought she saw Mara's silhouette. But before she could react, the figure vanished. Sophie stepped closer, her hand brushing Clara's arm. "She's here," Sophie whispered, voice trembling. "I know she is. And she's been watching us." Clara nodded, realizing that the feeling of being hunted was no longer imaginary. The sisters knew they couldn't stay in the living room forever, trapped by fear and anticipation. They moved to the study hoping for a better vantage point, a place to think, a place to plan. The room smelled faintly of old books and paper, comforting yet suffocating, as if the walls themselves held the weight of past secrets. Clara spread the journal open on the desk, tracing Mara's handwriting carefully. Each note, each symbol seemed to carry a double meaning, a clue hidden beneath a layer of playful cruelty. Sophie leaned over her shoulder, eyes scanning every line, her breathing shallow. Hours melted into minutes as they pieced together the fragments of Mara's plan. It became clear that this was more than a casual return. It was deliberate. Mara had a purpose, and it was entwined with the family history, the rivalries, and the secrets that Clara and Sophie had tried to bury. Every detail seemed to hint at a confrontation, something they had unknowingly been prepared for their entire lives. And yet, even as they understood the stakes, the uncertainty was suffocating. Every glance they exchanged was loaded with suspicion and unspoken questions. What would Mara demand? Would she reveal their secrets? Or was she setting them up for something even darker? The tension escalated when the front door creaked. Neither sister had moved to check it, both frozen by anticipation and fear. Then a faint whisper drifted through the hallway, soft, deliberate, unmistakably Mara's voice. "You've always been so predictable," it said, almost teasing. Clara's pulse quickened, Sophie's hand trembled against hers. The voice carried familiarity, yet a danger neither had felt before. Mara had always known how to push boundaries, but now it felt as if every secret, every rivalry, every buried argument was being weaponized. Clara's mind raced through every past encounter with Mara. She remembered the games, the dares, the moments of jealousy that had defined their childhood. But now the stakes were higher and the rules had changed. Mara wasn't a child anymore and neither were they. Every memory, every rivalry, every whispered argument in the past had been leading to this moment, a collision of loyalty, fear, and unresolved tension. Sophie finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "We can't let her control this, can we?" Clara didn't answer immediately. She knew that Mara's return had shifted the dynamic entirely. The envelope, the journal, the cryptic notes, all of it felt like pieces of a challenge, one that demanded a response but offered no instructions. And somewhere deep down, Clara realized that facing Mara would force them to confront each other as well. The rivalry that had simmered beneath the surface for years was now impossible to ignore. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows and making shadows dance across the walls. Clara and Sophie stood side by side, both aware of the growing danger, both aware of the fragile bond that still connected them. The tension between them was almost unbearable, a living thing that coiled tighter with every heartbeat. The house seemed alive, echoing their fears, whispering reminders of everything they had hidden from each other. And then, as if to underline the inevitability of what was coming, a final knock echoed from the front door, louder, more insistent, impossible to ignore. Both sisters froze, eyes locked on the door. Somewhere beyond it was Mara, and whatever she carried with her, the truth, the challenge, the reckoning, was about to enter their lives fully. The questions that had haunted them for years, the rivalries and secrets that had defined their childhood, were on the verge of a collision. Clara reached for Sophie's hand, a silent acknowledgement of their shared fear and the unspoken promise that they would face whatever came next together. But even as they prepared, the suspense tightened like a noose around their hearts. Mara was out there waiting. And inside, the sisters could only feel the rising storm, knowing that the climax, the confrontation, the truth, the unraveling of everything, was just beyond the threshold, ready to shatter the fragile balance of their lives. The front door remained closed, the heavy knocking now replaced by an eerie silence that made Clara and Sophie's hearts pound. They stood together, frozen, listening to the quiet settling over the house. Then, without warning, the floor beneath their feet creaked, not from the wind or old wood, but from something, or someone, moving inside. Clara gripped Sophie's hand tighter, her mind racing through every possibility. Mara had returned, yes, but now it felt like there was more to her plan than a simple test or confrontation. The house itself had become a trap, and they were standing in the center of it. A soft click echoed from the hallway, followed by a faint, metallic sound. Clara's breath caught as she realized it was the sound of the front door unlocking itself. But when she glanced toward it, there was no sign of Mara, or anyone else. A chill ran down her spine. "This isn't just about the letter," Sophie whispered, eyes wide. "Something else is happening, something we don't understand." Clara nodded, realizing she felt the same unease. Every instinct told her that the stakes had shifted. Mara's return had set off a chain of events they couldn't yet control. Then came the knock again, but this time it wasn't at the front door, it was coming from the study window. Both sisters froze, hearts racing as they slowly approached. Outside, barely visible in the dim streetlight, was a small package tied with string. Clara's hands trembled as she picked it up, examining it for any clue. There was no name, no address, just a symbol, identical to the triangle and circle Mara had used in the journal. Sophie leaned close, her voice barely audible. She's everywhere. She knows everything. Clara hesitated before opening the package. Inside was an old photograph, folded carefully. The image showed Mara, but not as they remembered her. She was standing between two unfamiliar figures, both blurred and shadowed, holding something that looked like an old family heirloom, a small, intricately carved box. Clara's stomach sank as she recognized the setting, the very greenhouse where they had once fought over secrets as children. Sophie reached for the photo, but Clara pulled it back instinctively. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the box in Mara's hands. "Do you see it? This isn't just about us. There's something bigger, something she's been hiding." Sophie swallowed hard. What if this is why she disappeared all those years ago? What if the rivalry, what if all the tension we felt growing up, was just a part of her plan? The thought sent a shiver through both of them. They had always thought Mara's disappearance was about escape, about frustration or jealousy, but now it seemed like she had been orchestrating something, leaving breadcrumbs for them to find, setting the stage for a confrontation far larger than their own childhood rivalries. A sudden noise from upstairs made them jump. It was the faint sound of footsteps, deliberate, slow, and unhurried. Clara and Sophie exchanged a tense glance. Neither had been upstairs since Mara's return, but now it seemed impossible to ignore. Whoever was moving above them was inside the house, and every shadow in the hall seemed to stretch toward them, hungry and alive. Clara whispered, "We need to know what's up there, but we have to be careful." She could be waiting. Sophie nodded, a mix of fear and determination flashing across her face. As they crept up the stairs, the tension between them grew heavier. Years of rivalry, secrets, and unspoken resentment now merged with fear and anticipation. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of shadow felt like a warning. At the top of the stairs, a faint light spilled from Mara's old bedroom. Clara hesitated, then pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty, but on the desk lay another envelope, this one larger, thicker, and more formal than the first. The handwriting was unmistakable. Sophie leaned forward, her voice trembling. "She's leading us somewhere, but where?" Clara picked up the envelope and carefully unfolded it. Inside was a map of the town, marked with symbols they recognized from the journal. One location in particular was circled in bold red ink, the old greenhouse. But the map also contained notes, dates, and cryptic instructions that hinted at secrets neither sister had imagined. Mara wasn't just back, she had set a plan in motion that could uncover things about their family, their past, and even their own relationship that they were not ready to face. Clara and Sophie stared at each other, realization dawning on both of them. This wasn't a simple reunion or a test of their loyalty, it was the beginning of a game with rules they had never learned. The stakes had escalated far beyond anything they had anticipated. Every hidden rivalry, every long-forgotten argument, every childhood secret was now a piece of a puzzle that Mara had constructed carefully, and they were the pieces being moved. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying a whisper that seemed almost alive. The greenhouse loomed in their minds, both a memory and a destination, a symbol of the mystery that had haunted their family for years. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the house, Mara was watching, waiting, and pulling the strings. The sisters knew one thing for certain. The tension between them was no longer just personal. It had become dangerous, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. As the night deepened, Clara folded the map carefully, and Sophie's hand brushed against hers once again. Neither spoke, but both felt the unspoken understanding. The confrontation at the greenhouse would reveal everything. And yet, the envelope, the journal, the photograph, they all hinted that the truth might be far more shocking than either of them could imagine. The second twist had landed, and now the countdown to the climax had begun. Every choice, every step, every moment would matter, and the sisters were about to be tested in ways they had never anticipated. The greenhouse stood at the edge of the property, dark and overgrown, yet strangely familiar. Clara and Sophie approached cautiously, clutching the map Mara had left behind. Every step felt weighted with memory, the smell of damp earth, the cracked glass panels, the way shadows stretched across the floor like fingers reaching for them. The tension between the sisters was almost unbearable, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and the unresolved rivalry that had shadowed them for years. This was the place where everything would either unravel or finally make sense. The door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing the interior they had known so well as children. Dust motes floated in the faint light from a single lantern, and in the center of the room sat Mara, calm and deliberate, waiting as if she had known they would arrive at this exact moment. Clara and Sophie froze, their eyes locked on her. Mara's smile was small but sharp, the kind that made both admiration and fear ripple through them. "You finally made it," Mara said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years. "I've been waiting for this, waiting for both of you to see the truth." The sisters exchanged a glance. Every clue, every note, every secret had led them here, and now, standing in the old greenhouse, they could feel the collision of past and present. Clara stepped forward, voice steady despite her racing heart. "What is this about, Mara? Why come back now? Why leave all those cryptic messages?" Mara's gaze shifted between them, calm and almost sad. "You think this is about me? No. This has always been about all of us. The rivalry, the secrets, the tension. It was never just childhood games. There were things hidden long before any of us knew. Things our family wanted buried." Sophie's breath caught. "Hidden how?" Mara reached for the small, carved box they had seen in the photograph. She opened it carefully, revealing a collection of old letters and faded photographs. Each one told a story they had never known. Betrayals between relatives, rivalries passed down from generation to generation, promises broken and forgotten. Mara's voice grew quieter but firmer. "Our family's history is tangled with secrets you were never supposed to uncover. I left to protect you from them, but I also left clues knowing that one day you would have to confront them. Tonight is that night." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. All the tension, all the rivalry, all the fear of the past, it had led to this moment. And now, with the letters and photographs spread out on the table, everything was finally visible. The sisters could see how past rivalries had shaped their present ones, how unspoken resentments had become almost invisible chains. Sophie's eyes welled with tears as she reached for Clara's hand. "We've been fighting each other all this time, over shadows of the past." Clara nodded, squeezing her hand, feeling the weight of years of misunderstanding lift slightly, even as the storm around them felt far from over. Mara's tone shifted, sharp and urgent. "But understanding the past isn't enough. You have to choose what comes next. Will you let it define you or will you break the cycle?" Clara and Sophie exchanged a look, the unspoken decision passing between them. They had been pitted against each other for so long, their rivalry amplified by secrets and miscommunication. Now they had the power to rewrite the rules. Together. Suddenly, a noise from outside snapped all three of them to attention. The greenhouse door rattled violently, and a shadow moved in the corner of the lantern light. Mara's calm demeanor faltered for the first time. "You weren't expecting this," she said. Clara and Sophie stepped closer to her instinctively. From the shadows emerged a figure neither had anticipated. A local historian, someone who had been investigating the same family mysteries, drawn by rumors of the lost heirloom and hidden letters. The historian had been following their trail, trying to uncover the story that Mara had spent years keeping secret. The tension spiked. Clara realized that what Mara had orchestrated was not only about confronting the past, it was also about protecting it. The family secrets, the rivalry, and the tension that had shaped their childhood were now being exposed to someone outside their circle. Mara's plan had been twofold: reconcile the sisters and ensure that the truth remained in safe hands. The revelation caught them all off guard, forcing Clara and Sophie to understand that the stakes were higher than they had imagined. Sophie took a deep breath. "So, everything, every secret, every rivalry, it led us here, but what now?" Mara closed the box gently. "Now you decide. You can walk away or you can embrace what you've learned. But whatever choice you make, it must be together. You cannot let the past turn you against each other again." Clara nodded, finally seeing the pattern she had missed for years. Mara's departure, the cryptic messages, the journals and letters, they had all been designed to teach them something about loyalty, trust, and the power of family. Sophie smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and renewed strength. They understood the lesson but also recognized the danger. The family history was complicated, and understanding it didn't mean they were free from its influence. Just as the tension began to settle, Mara leaned back, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. "One last thing," she said softly, pulling another photograph from the box. Clara and Sophie leaned in. It was a picture of the sisters as children, but there was a fourth figure, a shadowed child standing behind them. Neither remembered anyone else being there. Mara's eyes glinted with a secret she wasn't ready to reveal. You thought you knew your story, she whispered. But some parts have always been hidden. The sisters exchanged a glance, hearts racing. Even in resolution, even at the climax of the confrontation, Mara had left one last twist. The suggestion that there was still more to uncover, more secrets waiting, and perhaps more rivalry yet to surface. The greenhouse, once a place of childhood games, had become a proving ground for truth, trust, and survival. But the story wasn't over. Outside, the wind stirred, carrying the sense that history, rivalry, and mystery were far from finished. And the sisters knew that the Real challenge was only beginning. The photograph stayed in Clara's hands long after Mara had gone quiet. The lantern light flickered across the image, and both sisters leaned closer, trying to make sense of the shadowed figure standing behind them. It wasn't just a trick of light or damage from time. The shape was too clear, too deliberate. Sophie felt a chill run through her. I don't remember this, she whispered, her voice almost lost in the stillness of the greenhouse. Clara didn't respond right away. Her mind was racing, connecting pieces that had never quite fit before. Mara watched them carefully, her expression no longer sharp or teasing, but calm, almost relieved. You weren't supposed to remember, she said quietly. Some parts of our past were kept hidden, even from us. The words hung heavy in the air. The tension that had filled the night began to shift, not disappearing but changing into something deeper, understanding mixed with unease. Sophie shook her head slightly. But why? Why hide something like this? Mara stepped closer, her voice steady. Because not every truth is easy to carry, especially when you're young. That figure, it's someone who was part of our lives for a short time. Someone connected to the same family secrets you've just uncovered. When things fell apart back then, it was easier for everyone to pretend that chapter never existed. Clara felt something settle in her chest. For years, she had sensed that there were gaps in her memories, moments that didn't quite line up. Now, looking at the photograph, it all made sense. The rivalry between her and Sophie, the tension that always seemed bigger than the situation, it hadn't started with them. It had been passed down, shaped by things they didn't fully understand. And now, finally, they were seeing it clearly. Sophie let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that night. So all of this, the mystery, the clues, the letters, you brought us here to show us the truth? Mara nodded. Not just to show you, she said softly, but to give you a choice. You can keep carrying this rivalry, this tension, or you can let it go. You can decide what kind of story you want to live moving forward. The greenhouse felt different now. The shadows no longer seemed threatening, and the memories tied to the place began to feel less like burdens and more like lessons. Clara looked at Sophie, really looked at her, beyond the arguments and the competition. She saw her sister, the one who had stood beside her through everything, even when they didn't understand each other. Slowly, she reached out her hand again. This time there was no hesitation. Sophie took it, holding on tightly as if grounding herself in the moment. I don't want to keep fighting, Sophie said quietly. Not over things we didn't even choose. Clara nodded, her voice steady but soft. Neither do I. It wasn't a dramatic declaration, but it didn't need to be. The shift between them was real, built on everything they had faced that night. The tension, the mystery, the truth finally revealed. The historian, who had been standing quietly to the side, stepped forward. These stories, they matter, they said gently. But it's up to you how they're remembered. Some families let their past divide them. Others learn from it. Clara and Sophie exchanged a glance, understanding the weight of those words. The family secrets, the rivalry, the hidden history, they were all part of who they were, but they didn't have to define what came next. Mara closed the carved box and handed it to Clara. This belongs with you now, she said. Not as a burden but as a reminder. You know the truth. What you do with it is your choice. There was a finality in her tone, but also a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. For the first time, it felt like Mara wasn't controlling the situation anymore. She was letting go. As they stepped out of the greenhouse, the night air felt cooler, calmer. The wind had settled, and the world seemed quieter, as if the storm that had been building all evening had finally passed. The house in the distance no longer felt like a place filled with tension, but simply home. Clara glanced at Sophie, a small, genuine smile forming. It had been a long time since things felt this simple. On the walk back, they talked, not about the rivalry or the conflict, but about small things, memories that felt lighter now. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase everything overnight, but it was a start. And that was enough. Later, as Clara placed the box on the table back in the house, she paused for a moment. The envelope, the journal, the notes, They were still there, but they no longer felt threatening. They were pieces of a story that had been told, understood, and finally faced. Sophie leaned against the doorway watching her. "Do you think there's more?" she asked quietly. Clara considered the question, then smiled faintly. "There's always more," she said. "But now, we'll face it together." The camera of the moment, the feeling of it, lingered there, two sisters no longer divided by rivalry but connected by something stronger. The mystery had been uncovered, the tension had been confronted, and the story had found its resolution. But what made it meaningful wasn't the secrets or the twists. It was the choice they made at the end, to trust, to understand, and to move forward without letting the past control them. And as the lights in the house dimmed and the night settled into quiet, one thing became clear. The story of Between Two Sisters was never just about rivalry or tension. It was about what happens when truth comes to light, and how, even after everything, people can still choose each other.